Future simple. It's so much more than just the future. And you need to know all the subtly different ways it's used so that you can speak English correctly. To help you do this, first I'll explain the form of future simple so that you know which grammatical structure this video is about. Then I'll explain 17 ways that we use future simple, including examples in context so that you can understand each use. I'm Gillian Scott. I taught myself a language to B2 level, and I've been teaching English as a foreign language since 2013. First, let's check that you know which grammatical structure we're talking about here by quickly going over the form of future simple. An example. I will do it. Here we can see future simple is formed with will plus the bare or base infinitive. We make the negative by adding in not after will. So I will not do it. And we make the interrogative form, that's the question form, by moving will to the start. For example, will you do it? But remember, when we speak, we usually use contractions. We can contract I will to I'll or I'll, as it's more often pronounced, and we can contract will not to won't. Sometimes students learn the full forms and then use them all the time when they speak. But if you want to speak English in a natural way, it's vital that you use the contractions because that's what we usually use when we speak. So, if you're not already using the contractions, start now and your English will instantly improve. Okay, now we've covered that, let's move on to 17 ways that you can actually use future simple. We use future simple for decisions made at or just before the time of speaking. For example, imagine you are in a restaurant and the waiter says, "What would you like?" You reply by saying, "I'll have the steak, please." You made the decision to have the steak either at the time when the waiter asked you what you wanted or just before when you were looking at the menu. Another example. Somebody else is speaking and you want to say something. So you say, "I'm afraid I'll have to interrupt you." You made the decision to interrupt the person either at the time when you spoke or just before. When we use future simple in this way, we can replace will with shall. This makes the register much more formal. However, we can also do this to create a humorous effect. In other words, to be funny. This humorous effect is created because it can be funny to say something really formal when that's not expected. For example, the trains are on strike today. I shall take the bus instead. A strike is when a group of people refuse to work because of an argument with their employer. We use future simple to make predictions about the future that are not based on evidence. For example, person A says, "I don't think you'll get the job." And person B asks, "Why do you think that?" And person A replies, "No reason really. It's just a feeling I have." So, person A is making a prediction about the future based on nothing. No knowledge that they have themselves and nothing external to them. When we use future simple this way, we often use it with the verb to think. I think he'll get the job. I think we'll win the lottery. But notice that when we make the negative, it's the verb to think that we make negative, not the future simple. So, I think he'll get the job becomes I don't think he'll get the job, and not I think he won't get the job. And I think we'll win the lottery becomes I don't think we'll win the lottery, and not I think we won't win the lottery. We use future simple to make deductions and to speculate about things in the present, the future, and in general. When you make a deduction, you reach a conclusion based on information that you know. When you speculate, you guess what the conclusion might be because you don't have enough information to know for sure. So, when you make a deduction, there is a higher degree of certainty in what you say, whereas when you speculate, there's a lower degree of certainty. Okay, let's look at some examples of speculation or deduction in general. The film's in Japanese, so I won't be able to understand it. The people who live in that house will be millionaires. Next, some examples about the present. He's not answering the door. He'll be out. He's out now. And he's lost a lot of weight recently. He'll be on a diet. He's on a diet now. And now some examples about the future. She's been spending far too much recently. She won't have any money left soon. And they usually go to Spain on their holiday, so I reckon they'll go there again this year. To reckon is a more informal way of saying to think. Also, it's really good for you to know that another way of saying that we use future simple to make deductions or to speculate specifically about the future is to say that we use future simple to make predictions about the future based on things that you know. So you might hear this use of future simple being described in either way. We use future simple to talk about inevitable future events. This includes things in the future that cannot be changed or are highly unlikely to be changed. For example, I've just posted the present, so it'll arrive in a few days. And this time next week, we'll be on holiday. It also includes future facts. For example, it'll be my birthday in 2 weeks, and it'll be spring soon. And it includes events on an itinerary. An itinerary is a plan of a journey or trip, usually including when the events on the journey or trip will happen. For example, the Prime Minister will arrive at 3. And on the first day, we'll go to the museum. On the second day, we'll go shopping. And on the third day, we'll lounge around by the pool. To lounge around means to spend your time in a relaxed way, sitting or lying and doing very little. We use future simple to make promises. A promise is when you tell someone that you are certain to do something, usually something positive. For example, I promise I'll come home straight after work. And I'll hand my homework in on time next time. I promise. As you can see from these examples, when we use future simple for promises, we often use it with the verb to promise. It is possible, though, to use future simple to make promises without using the verb to promise, just using future simple on its own. We use future simple to make threats. A threat is when you tell someone that something unpleasant or violent is certain to happen, especially if something else is not done. So, a threat is similar to a promise, except that promises are positive, whereas threats are negative. Some examples. Stop spending so much time on social media or I'll take your phone away. And you'll suffer for this. To suffer means to experience physical or mental pain. We can use future simple to make offers. We can do this using affirmative statements. For example, I'll give you a lift to the station. We can also use affirmative questions. In this case, we use shall instead of will. For example, shall I give you a lift to the station? We can also make offers using will in negative questions. When we do this, we are trying more to persuade the listener to accept the offer. For example, won't you have dessert? We use future simple to make suggestions. We do this using affirmative questions. And in these questions, we use shall rather than will. For example, shall I make dinner? And shall we get a dog? We use future simple to make requests. For example, will you get some milk when you go to the supermarket? And come with me, will you? But when using future simple to make requests, be careful about the tone you use. When using future simple in this way, it's quite easy to sound abrupt and impolite. So make sure you use a nice friendly tone in order to avoid this. We use future simple for invitations. For example, will you come round for dinner on Saturday? And will you come to the cinema with me on Friday night? We use future simple to say how willing we are to do things. If you're willing to do something, you're happy to do it if it needs to be done. To say that we are willing to do something, we use the affirmative form. For example, I'll give you all the support you need. Or, he'll do everything he can for you. If we are not willing to do something, or in other words, if we refuse to do something, we use the negative form. For example, I'm afraid I won't be able to do that. Or, I will never do that. And of course, machines can also refuse to do the things we want them to do. So we can also say things like, the car won't start and the computer won't turn on. We use future simple for repeated actions, habits, and routines. In other words, things we do again and again. For example, most mornings I'll go for a run, then I'll have breakfast. And after a big meal, I'll have a walk round the park just to stretch my legs. To stretch your legs means to go for a walk, especially after sitting in the same position for a long time. Also, notice that we usually say when or how often the action happens. In these examples, most mornings and after a big meal. Sometimes when we use future simple for repeated actions, habits, and routines, we do so in order to show disapproval or annoyance. When we do this, we use the full form, not the contraction, and we stress will. For example, I've asked you not to again and again, but you will leave your clothes on the floor. And, well, you will get into debt, won't you? We use future simple to talk about general truths. In other words, things that are normally or usually true. For example, a satisfied worker will be more productive in their work. And some dogs will bite when provoked. To provoke means to cause something to happen, usually something negative. We use future simple to express firm intentions or determination. If you're determined to do something, you have the ability to do it even though it is difficult. When we use future simple in this way, we can use the contraction. For example, I'll definitely pay you back the money. But we often emphasize the firmness of the intention or the strength of the determination by using the full form and stressing will. For example, I will stop smoking, and this year I will go to the gym every Thursday. We use future simple to talk about obligation or necessity in the present or in the future. Some examples. all freelancers will submit weekly invoices. And the tenant will pay the rent on the 1st of every month. In legal documents, for example, contracts, will, can, and often is replaced with shall. For example, the tenant shall pay the rent on the 1st of every month, and the hirer shall maintain the equipment to a reasonable standard. We can use future simple to give commands, usually in anger or annoyance. When we do this, we can use the normal word order. For example, you'll wear it whether you like it or not. And you will be quiet at once. Or we can use inversion. For example, will you be quiet? And will you stop picking your nose? To pick your nose means to use your finger to remove things from your nose. Like this. Anyway, when using inversion, whether something is a command, like we're looking at the moment, or a request, like we covered earlier, can depend on the tone used. As commands using future simple are usually made in anger or annoyance, we tend to use a more angry tone. So the following example is a command. Will you stop picking your nose? Alternatively, by adopting a softer tone, we can change the same words into a question and make a request. For example, will you stop picking your nose? We also use future simple to say how much money somebody needs to pay. For example, you're buying something in a shop and the shop assistant says, "That'll be £6.50, please." Even though I've just covered 17 ways that we use future simple, can you believe that there are even more ways that we use it? Well, there are. For a start, I haven't even touched on using will in conditionals or with if. There's so much to cover there. I'll save that for another video. Apart from that though, can you think of any other ways that we use future simple? If so, put them in the comments. Also in the comments, try writing some sentences using future simple in the ways that we have been looking at today. And remember to try to include enough context to make the use clear. Next, check out this video. Alternatively, watch this playlist, which I also think you'll love. Good luck with your English!